neurosurgeon. So crank it.
Had some straight here.
Yes. Okay, and
Hey, John. Did I have it?
Sometimes give you a blank one, we just have to.
Everybody else is being respectful. You know.
All right, let's do it. Bring the jury out.
then she wouldn't let the cocaine in.
She doesn't want to take ass about it, they weren't going to exhibit it. Yeah. They can't even with the federal law, we call it, you know, the youth was never had it, but unless you will economies.
So you know, Jack, read from it.
Oh, that's good. It's not Jack, it's
Please be seated.
Number 15-45. William Melendez, jury trial. Here's for the record.
Good morning, Your Honor. Robert Donaldson, appearing on behalf of the people.
Harmony Frank on behalf of the people.
John Donaldson on behalf of the people.
James Townsend on behalf of William Melendez. Alexander Brennan is lecturing up north.
Your Honor, counsel has graciously agreed to let Dr. Schmidt testify out of order.
Very good. Call your witness.
Yes. Dr. Schmidt, could you step forward, please, and be
Step
sworn?
forward. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm testimony about to give this man the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, very good. You may be seated. Spell your name first and last.
My name is Carl, C-A-R-L, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
You've been here a couple times, haven't you?
Yes.
A couple at least, okay, go
Right.
ahead.
Could you tell the jury your name, please?
Pull that microphone a little closer to you. I know you're out there. Okay.
My name is Carl Schmidt.
And how are you presently employed, sir?
I'm a forensic pathologist employed as a medical examiner for Wayne County.
Do you have a supervisory role at that institution?
I do.
And what is that?
I am the chief medical examiner.
What's that mean?
Well, it
You
means
the boss?
I am the boss.
All right, go ahead.
And how many people do you supervise?
About 35, give or take.
And is your facility also a training facility?
It is.
And what sort of people do you train and from where do they come?
Well, we are an accredited training program in forensic pathology through the University of Michigan. We are accredited by the committee that accredits residency and fellowship training programs. We are also the training site for the area programs in pathology, and we're also a rotation site for area medical schools.
And what sort of background do you have to have the job that you have now?
Well, I'm a physician licensed to practice medicine in Ohio and Michigan, and I have residency training in anatomic and clinical pathology. I also have some specialty training in forensic pathology, and I'm board certified in the 3 branches of pathology.
And you've been at this a little while, as the judge alluded to, is that correct?
I have.
And how long have you been a doctor?
Oh, I've been a physician since 1984.
So you're like me, you got to do the math to figure out how many years.
Actually, it's 1981.
And have you been qualified as an expert in your field before?
Couple times.
Yeah, many times.
So Judge, we will stipulate to his expertise.
Any objection?
None.
Okay, very good. We're going to allow Dr. Schmidt to be considered an expert in the field of forensic pathology. What does that mean? He can give his expert opinion in that field. And you're going to help us with that.
I didn't hear you, sorry, Judge.
So you're gonna help us with that so they can understand what that is?
What is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the branch of pathology that studies how and why people die, the mechanisms and disease processes that lead to a person's death. And we do that not only by actually examining the body and doing an autopsy, but also by using laboratory methods that will also allow us to help determine what happened.
Is a subset of that specialty toxicology?
It is.
Can you explain to the jury what toxicology is, please?
Toxicology is the branch of clinical chemistry that studies the metabolism, distribution, and effect of substances that are toxic.
And do you need to strike that? Do you have any particularized training in the field of toxicology?
As part of residency training in forensic pathology, as part of the material that we deal with toxicology because a significant number of the deaths that we see are due to a particular class of drugs.
Have you yourself had any training or experience beyond your initial training in it?
Well, I have a special interest in it. Most of my publications have actually been in forensic toxicology, both in long-term changes in gene expression in the brain, as well as the distribution and metabolism of drugs, particularly morphine, methadone, and alprazolam. And I've done workshops on interpreting toxicology at national meetings. And I am a member of the Society of Forensic Toxicologists.
I'd ask that they qualified in the field of toxicology.
Any objection?
For the further qualified as an expert in the field of toxicology.
Sir, did there come a point in time when you were asked to review the medical records of Floyd Dent?
There was.
And did you do so?
I did.
And it's been suggested that Floyd Dent was under the influence of cocaine at the time of the events in question. Was he?
Well, we should ask for a foundation for that answer, Judge.
What? A foundation?
Yeah, I mean, what is he relying on to say that if he reviewed the medical records?
Okay, let's go ahead.
Why did you review the medical records?
Because you sent them to me and asked me to review them.
And did that review of the records lead you to a conclusion? That's the question I asked you.
Well, I think you're referring to whether or not he had any cocaine present in the blood, and the test was negative for cocaine.
And the question is, was he high on cocaine 3 hours before that?
Well, there's 2 parts to that answer. The first is clearly whether or not you're high is actually a subjective appreciation, but whether or not he was under the effect, any measurable effect of cocaine, the answer is no, because the test for cocaine was negative.
All right. It's been suggested that perhaps it had all flushed out of his system in the 3 hours between the time of the event and the blood draw. Do you have any opinion as it relates to that?
No, if the cocaine test was negative, whatever number of hours after the incident occurred, there is no possibility that he had any cocaine on board at the time that the incident occurred.
All right. How long would cocaine or its metabolites remain in your system if you had done cocaine?
Well, cocaine has a short half-life itself. It's not more than 45 minutes to an hour. A drug will clear in about 5 half-lives. And I should explain up front that a half-life is the time it takes to metabolize about 50% of a drug's concentration when present in the blood. So, for example, let's say that you have 100 milligrams of a drug that has a half-life of 1 hour. After 1 hour, you will have 50 milligrams left. That's half of 100. After 2 hours, you're going to have 25 milligrams because that's half of 50. After 3 hours, you're going to have 12.5 milligrams because that is half of 25. But because cocaine has a short half-life, tests for cocaine don't include just the parent compound. They include the immediate breakdown product because cocaine's half-life is so short that you can actually use cocaine, and if you metabolize it quickly, you will no longer have any cocaine. But the byproduct of cocaine, the major byproduct, which is called benzoyl ecgonine, and that is spelled BENZOYLECGONINE. That has a half-life of about, and from now on I'll refer to it as BEG. BEG has a half-life of about 4 to 6 hours. So that it would take about 30 hours for benzoyl ecgonine to clear the bloodstream. So that if you tested negative for cocaine and then if you tested negative for cocaine at, I don't remember what time it was, it means that you also were negative for benzoyl ecgonine, which means that there was no possibility that you would have been using cocaine for even hours before this incident occurred.
All right. It's also been suggested that the Michigan State Police's analysis of the blood was flawed because it did not show the presence of morphine, and it was administered at the hospital. Have you reviewed the data as it relates to that particular suggestion?
Well, the morphine was given intravenously. And that is also, that also has to be interpreted in context. If you give intravenous morphine, the concentration peaks after 5 minutes. And then it declines very rapidly from there. So that you have to actually, when you prescribe intravenous morphine, you actually give it every couple of hours or so because the effect peaks so quickly and the drug actually clears so quickly. But I think the bigger issue is that the Michigan State Police Lab is actually accredited and has quality control procedures such that if a test is negative, then it is reliably negative.
What's that mean, reliably negative?
It means that if you're accredited, and the Michigan State Police Lab, I know is accredited, it means that periodically the lab gets sent samples from outside agencies to test. And they get tested. This is what accreditation is about. You get blind samples tested, and then you send them the results of your lab testing in so that your lab is compared against other labs. And if your lab has the right answer, then you maintain your accreditation, and that is what I mean by reliably negative, that you have passed a series of quality assurance procedures, that you have internal quality controls, and I don't know of any lab anywhere that is accredited that doesn't have those quality controls.
Do you find anything unusual about the fact that he was given morphine 2 or 3 hours before the blood draw and it didn't show up in the blood analysis?
No, if he was given a single dose, it could very well have broken down so quickly, especially intravenously. Remember, intravenously, the drug concentration peaks very quickly, so that by the time the blood was tested, it could very well have decreased to a point where it was below the limit of detection for the procedure that the lab uses to measure morphine.
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes. Dr. Schmidt, you work for the County of Wayne?
No, actually, I work for the University of Michigan.
Okay, and as a medical examiner, do you work for the County of Wayne?
Yes, I have the appointment.
And so you work for the County of Wayne?
No, I actually work for the University of Michigan, and we have a contract for the provision of forensic services with the County of Wayne.
You get paid for that, right?
Right.
So why are you reluctant to tell me that you work for the County of Wayne?
Because technically, I'm answering the question explicitly. Technically, I don't work for the County of Wayne. Technically, I am an employee of the University of Michigan.
And so your relationship with the County of Wayne, and I don't mean to argue with you, is one of employment. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess. We're actually under contract, but yes, I will concede.
So you are a contract employee of the County of Wayne?
Right.
Okay. Now, you reviewed the medical records?
I did.
Did you see anything in the medical records that is inconsistent with your testimony?
No, I don't recall off the top of my head anything like that.
Okay. Did you, the medical records that I'm talking about are the records of Floyd Dent for his hospitalization on January 28th of 2005, right?
Right.
Did you,
15, I think.
15, I'm in another place.
I know you
All right. I want to come back, though.
are.
2015.
Thank you. Courtroom 802.
All right. Now, you noted that he had been given 4 milligrams of morphine.
Right.
Do you remember from the records what the time frame of the ordering of that morphine was?
It was shortly after the incident.
The incident was at 9:45 in the evening, approximately. If I showed you the medical record, would that refresh your recollection?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to pull out. A copy of the medical record so that you can review it as we go through it, if you need to have your memory refreshed. The incident occurred at 9:45. I think we can agree to that approximately. And he was hospitalized at Garden City Hospital. You saw those records, right?
Yes.
Okay. From those records, are you able to determine when it was that the morphine was ordered?
So there is the emergency room mission note at 117, and there is an order here for morphine 4 milligrams, 2 milliliters IV push, 1 time staff for 1 dose.
Okay. And typically those orders are given fairly quickly?
Yes.
But would the record reflect when it is that the actual shot was administered to him?
There's probably a nursing note somewhere in here that will say when that was actually released.
All right.
But if you know what it is, it would help rather than me having to try to find it.
Well, as you sit here today, you don't recall. The nurse's note is in the record, and that's been admitted into evidence, Doc. If you don't want to page through it, I'll just ask you the question. Is it common that morphine is not administered right at 117?
Is it common?
Yes, in the hospital setting.
No, it would have been, there would have been some lag time between the order and the actual administration of the morphine.
Okay. Now, we know that there was a blood draw that had occurred in this case, and that was the subject of the analysis by the Michigan State Police Forensic Science Division.
Okay.
All right. Do you know when that blood was drawn?
No, I think it was a couple of hours later, something like that.
Okay. If I were to tell you that it was at 3:58 and 3:59, would you agree with me?
Sure.
I'd stipulate that was the time as reflected on the record.
Very good.
How big is a vial for a blood draw, Doc?
Well, it depends on how much you're gonna draw and what you're gonna draw for and how much blood you can get.
Okay. In a situation such as this, and without referring to the record, because I don't think it's in there, if you'll put that down, unless you see something that you want to talk to me about.
No.
If you'll set the record down. Typically, when a blood draw occurs, there are 2 vials that are taken, correct?
Well, it depends. Were there 2 vials taken in this case?
In this case, there were 2 vials taken. We agree?
I agree, there were 2 vials.
Okay. What is the standard size of a vial?
Well, it depends, but usually you draw somewhere between 10 to 20 milliliters of blood, depending on what it is that you're testing for.
Okay. In this instance, the lab report would reflect how much blood was drawn. Would you agree?
Sure.
And I'll ask you to take a look at this laboratory report and ask you whether or not you had reviewed this before coming here to testify today.
Okay. No, I don't think I had seen this before.
All right. There had been previous testimony relating to this lab report, and how much do you see drawn from the first vial?
That there was less than 1 milliliter of blood.
Okay. Do you see any problem with the drawing of less than 1 milliliter of blood?
Well, it depends on what you're going to test for. So
Okay.
If depends on the range of drugs you want to test for, but it may or may not be a problem.
In this particular case, was it a problem?
I don't know.
Was there any analysis done of the blood in vial number 1?
It was analyzed for alcohol.
Okay. And was there any analysis of the blood for purposes of drugs?
No.
Was there are you looking at the lab report for the item 1 and item 2?
Yes.
Is there a notation in that report to the effect that the quantity of the submitted specimen is insufficient for drug analysis?
Yes, it says that.
Well, I just asked you whether or not you saw any problem with the amount of blood that was drawn.
Your Honor, he didn't do the analysis, that person's already testified.
Overruled.
Would you agree that if you don't have a sample sufficient with which to do an analysis, that might be a potential for a problem in making a determination as to whether it is that the blood contained the drug that was in question?
Yeah, but there were 2 samples here.
That's not what I'm asking you now. I'm asking you about the first specimen. We'll get to the second.
Well, the first specimen, they analyzed alcohol, and then there's a notation that says that the quantity of the submitted specimen is insufficient for drug analysis.
Okay. Now, what was the amount of blood that was in the first item?
Less than 1 milliliter.
And what was the amount of blood that was in the second item that was drawn?
2 milliliters.
Would you consider that 1 or 2 millimeters would be optimum for an analysis of the drug as it relates to cocaine and/or opiates?
Well, I don't know. The lab is better able to answer that.
Okay. What is the ideal? Because you say that you have an interest in forensic toxicology. You are familiar with drawing of blood, right?
Yes.
And you are familiar with the tube size that's usually used in situations where blood is drawn for purposes of analysis.
Right.
Those tubes are larger than 2 milliliters, right?
Right.
You're looking at some records, Doc, and I need you to testify from your memory here. Okay? I want to have a conversation with you about the size of the vial. and the fact that the vial should have a representative sample of the person's blood before you come to a realistic determination as to what is actually
object to
there.
the argumentative
No,
form of the
I'm
question.
framing- I'm framing my question, Judge.
Sustain, rephrase.
Doc, what is the size of the vials that are typically used in blood draws pursuant to search warrants? For drugs.
I don't know about search warrants. We use 10 milliliter container.
10 milliliters is 5 times more than 2 milliliters. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. What factors would go into whether or not a person is able to submit blood once the phlebotomist puts the needle in the arm?
Oh, it can be any number of things, the state of anxiety, whether or not you have good veins to draw from. You know, it's hard to, some people are just simply hard to draw, no matter how tightly you put on the tourniquet.
Would the fact that the person is agitated, would that affect their ability to submit to the blood draw?
Sure.
Would the fact that the person is combative, would the fact that the person was combative with the phlebotomist, would that be a
I'm gonna
basis upon
object,
which?
there's no record of that.
There is a record of it.
No, there's some
Oh,
words on a
that's
piece of
hypothetical,
paper.
overruled, it's just hypothetically, right?
It's hypothetically, but
Just-
yes.
Okay, very
He
good.
says
I'll allow.
it's a piece of paper, it's admitted into evidence here, Judge.
Okay, very good, I'll allow, go ahead.
And sir, the answer is?
Sure.
Okay. Somebody's tugging and pulling away, they're gonna have a potential problem in getting the
The
blood.
hypothetical has to be based on
It
evidence.
is, counsel, now. we
There-
going
That
to-
is a good faith question based on facts that we would try to introduce,
All
but
right.
we're kept from doing it.
Now he's testifying again, Judge.
Stop.
What he asked-
Very good, just rephrase the question. I think
What
just
is
tell
a
him to calm
presumptive-
down, or you keep jumping up and down. Go
Only
ahead.
one of us can be upset at a time, Judge.
Very good, go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
What is a presumptive test?
Are you talking about a screen?
Okay, a urine screen, is that a presumptive test?
Yeah, well, presumptive test means that something tests positive, but you don't know it's there until you actually measure it, because
Well, let's,
you need to confirm its presence.
is it a chemical test?
Yes, it is.
Is it a test that is ordinarily administered in hospitals, in your experience?
Yes, so, but by definition, urine screening, for example, is presumptive testing.
But I want to ask you the question, whether or not the screens that are requested in hospitals are chemical tests.
Yes,
And they react with certain drugs to make it a presumptive determination that there is a drug in the person's urine.
correct.
Okay, now, do they have presumptive tests for morphine or
Yes.
opiates?
Yes,
Do they have presumptive tests for cocaine?
yes.
Do doctors use those and rely on those in the treatment of patients in the hospital?
I don't treat patients.
I asked you, you've probably interacted with a lot of doctors, haven't you?
I have.
You've been in hospitals many times. In fact, you work for the University of Michigan.
Right.
Are you aware of whether or not doctors rely on that test in the treatment of patients?
Well, it depends, but yeah, they can use those results to treat under some circumstances.
In this case, you said that you reviewed the medical records.
I did.
When you reviewed the medical records, did you happen to see in the medical records the fact that there had been a drug screen?
Yes, somewhere. That's what I was looking for.
Okay. I'd ask you to address your attention to page 5. Is that paginated?
Page 5.
Under
Okay.
diagnostic impression, is there some reference to the fact that a drug screen was obtained by Dr. Aziz?
Yes,
Okay, and I'll run you through it. You remember reading that before you testified here today?
I didn't read this before I testified here today. I read it some time ago.
Okay. Do you remember that from when you read it a long time ago?
Yes,
All right. Did you also read in his history that he had stated
object to this,
that
Your Honor.
he...
I'm going to object to this, Your Honor. We've already discussed this in chambers. He knows he can't do this.
I don't know about that. Let's approach.
No, that's right. We already done with it, come on. We'll make a record outside the person. Okay, very good.
On page 23, Doctor, if you'll take a look at it, you're going to see the blood work. You see it on page 23?
19, 20, then it jumps to 28, 29.
Oh, you don't have it?
Nope.
Okay, let's... Yeah. You there?
Yes,
On page 23, you see the chemistry?
yes,
And then there's hematology on page 24,
okay,
correct?
right,
All right, and then on page 25, you see the urinalysis?
page 25. Yes,
And in the urinalysis, as it follows on to page 26, do you see a report relating
Correct.
to urine, drugs, miscellaneous?
right,
In that report, does it show, as it relates to cocaine, positive?
right,
What time does that show, positive?
312.
What time does the, and then do you see anything there for opiates?
Yes, they're positive too.
Okay. The positive opiates, is morphine an opiate?
Yes,
Morphine was administered by the doctor according to the record you've seen,
right,
and that would have been sometime between 1:17 and the time that this test is returned. Would you agree?
yeah, 2 hours and a half, something like that.
Okay. And in 2 hours and a half later, the urine screens are showing positive for the morphine that was in his system because the doctor administered it, correct?
In the drug screen,
That's what I said,
right,
yes. And in the urine drug screen, it's also showing positive for cocaine,
right,
correct? Now, doctors in hospitals, and I think this is within your wheelhouse, doctors in hospitals don't give people who come in for trauma cocaine, do they?
they do not.
But the properties of cocaine, there are anesthetic properties to cocaine. Would you agree?
Yes,
If you had cocaine in your system, would you be more likely or less likely to feel pain?
I don't know. Cocaine is used as a local anesthetic.
What is an anesthetic?
It's a drug that is administered to decrease the sensation of pain.
Okay. is when you say local anesthetic, you're talking about topical, or are you talking about an anesthetic that could be ingested in some fashion and work to operate as you just discussed?
Right.
Okay. In toxicology terms, is cocaine something that slows you down or makes you agitated?
It tends to make you agitated.
In terms of your strength or your ability with cocaine, does it increase your strength or your ability, or does it decrease it, or does it do anything at all?
I don't know.
Are you aware of any studies in your practice that talk about the increased strength of people with cocaine when they're in their agitated state?
Well, there's something called excited delirium, but that's a whole separate issue.
Well, it may or may not be. What is that?
Excited delirium is a state of agitation and delirium where you have hallucinations and altered perception of reality, and you tend to have psychotic behavior.
Does this happen with people who have used cocaine over a period of time?
It can, but it can also happen with people who have not used cocaine for a long time.
Okay, but I'm talking now in the context of cocaine. Are you saying that if somebody takes cocaine and they haven't been using it for a long
I'm
time,
going to object to
that
this
could
whole
occur?
line of questioning. There's no evidence of any of this.
Well, the medical records in...
Your Honor, here he goes again.
Move on.
Move on?
Yeah.
Have you seen the video in this case?
No.
Have you talked to the prosecutor in this case?
Yes.
How many times have you talked to him?
2 or 3 times. Like,
2 or 3 times total?
yes.
Okay. You talked a little bit about the half-life of cocaine, did you not?
Yes.
Do you recognize the disposition of toxic drugs and chemicals in man as a source of that you might rely on as it relates to cocaine and morphine?
Right.
We were talking a little bit about half-lives, is that right?
Right.
Let's go back a second. We're talking about half-life of blood, of a concentration of a chemical in the blood.
Right.
Okay. And what I want to do is I want to distinguish between half-life of chemicals in blood versus half-life of chemicals in urine.
Okay.
All right. You recognize that when you ingest either an opiate or cocaine, that at some point in time it is going to show up in your blood.
Sure. That's right.
And it's relatively quickly. Would you agree?
Yes.
Now, when the morphine was injected in this case, we know because that's the hospital record.
Right.
Okay. But if Mr. Dent, and I'm only saying if, he had ingested cocaine, we don't know when it was that he ingested it. Is that correct?
Correct.
If he injected cocaine, would you agree that it would be in his blood for a certain period of time?
Yes.
And that's the half-life, correct?
The parent cocaine, yes.
The parent cocaine.
Right.
In his blood.
Right.
As it relates to that, it would then be dissipating over time, and that's the discussion that we had relating to half-life of cocaine, correct?
Right.
All right. Not knowing when
The fact is that if the drug concentration, if cocaine was negative in the blood at the time it was drawn, because the testing for cocaine includes benzoyl-ecgonine, he did not use it for hours, many hours, perhaps a whole day before the blood was actually drawn. So I don't care what the urine concentration or that the fact that the urine tests positive for cocaine is or is not. The fact is that if the blood concentration of cocaine and its metabolites was negative at whatever hours after the incident occurred, he had not used the drug for hours or days before the incident occurred, period.
But as it relates to the number of hours or the number of days, you do have to have a starting point, don't you?
Well, sure, but I fail to see
All right.
how this is relevant.
I'll take that because the judge is going to decide what's relevant. I just need to ask you the questions and hopefully you'll answer it.
Right.
Okay. As it relates to the dissipation or the half-life, I say dissipation, maybe half-life is a better term.
Right.
Does it vary between?
Sure.
And these are all factors that affect an analysis of a half-life, do they not?
Yes.
And I'm not talking about just cocaine or opiates.
Right.
It would apply to both.
Right.
Okay. Doc, you weren't out there that night, were you?
No.
You never met with or talked to Mr. Dent, have you?
I have not.
You're here to testify based on your scientific knowledge and your experience, right?
Correct.
Do you know as you sit here what the half-life of cocaine is in the blood?
Depending on who you measure, on who you read, but it's somewhere between 40 minutes to an hour, give or take.
Would you consider disposition of toxic drugs and chemicals in man as a learned treatise?
Yes.
You're familiar with it?
Yes.
Is it true that following nasal topical application of 1.5 milligrams of cocaine to patients' plasma concentration of the drug reached a peak at 1 hour and declined by 3 hours? Would you agree with 1 to 3 hours?
Yeah, that's one of the papers I cite in that chapter.
Am I misquoting this? Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And as it relates to the analysis in the same book of morphine, that the half-life is discussed there as well?
Yes.
Is the half-life in surgical patients 2.9 hours for men who have received morphine in the blood?
Yes. That's that. Remember that basalt is actually a compendium of, or a review of articles in the literature that have looked at how these drugs are handled by the body, so that what you're actually citing is not basalt itself, but the paper that looked at that particular morphine pattern of metabolism.
So it's a compilation of research studies that people have done, people who are specialists in the field, who have submitted their papers and they have been compiled as a part of this learned treatise.
Right.
Doesn't take away from the fact that you rely on this learned
Right.
treatise. And it doesn't take away from the fact that it says what it says, we just talked about, right?
Right.
Now, do you have an opinion as to whether or not a person who has renal problems, another word for, what is renal? Kidney?
Yes.
Okay. And does it have any discussion as it relates to whether or not the elimination of morphine is affected by somebody who might have a kidney problem?
Yes, it does discuss that.
And does it say that it's not significantly different for renal patients?
I think that's right.
Okay. You want to look at it to make sure? Shall I refresh your recollection?
No, I believe you.
Anything more? Nothing more, Judge.
Regret.
Let's talk about the presumptive urine test. That test indeed does say positive cocaine, is that right?
It does.
Does that mean there was cocaine in the urine?
No, actually, it doesn't mean there's cocaine in the urine.
What does it mean?
What it means is that there is benzoyl ecocane in the urine. Cocaine, for all practical purposes, doesn't appear in the urine. It gets broken down so quickly that it immediately gets metabolized into benzoyl ecocane.
Okay, so a positive test for cocaine in the urine is for what we've been talking about as a metabolite, is that right?
Right.
Something that doesn't even get you high, right?
Correct.
And you were asked about a study with nasotopical uses of cocaine, right? And the half-lives to go along with that, right?
Right.
What is that nasotopical? What does that mean?
That you snorted it.
Right. People usually snort rock cocaine.
Well,
I don't know.
I was going to object on his expertise, Judge.
Let's talk about presumptive test. Are there false positives in presumptive tests sometimes?
Well, that's why they're called presumptive, because when you do a screen, you can find positive testing because drugs can cross-react with each other, or rather drugs can cross-react with the substance that is used to actually test for the presence of the drug of abuse in the urine, so that a presumptive test can actually mean that it's testing positive for a drug that is completely harmless.
And do you have any knowledge of the kind of testing that was done in this case in terms of the urinalysis?
Well, it was probably some kind of commercial immunoassay, which is what they usually are.
Object to probably.
Sustain.
Earlier you told this jury that Floyd Dent wasn't high on cocaine when this happened. Is that correct?
Well, if the cocaine was negative, there's no reason to think he was under the influence of cocaine.
Okay. There's no scientific evidence at all that he was under the influence of cocaine. Would you agree with that?
Right.
And indeed, probably if he had used cocaine, it would have been well before the events in question.
Correct.
And he was not under the influence.
Right.
That's correct. Nothing further.
Only briefly. No scientific indication that he had used cocaine. Is that what you said?
Right.
Okay. Are you ignoring the presumptive positive for cocaine?
I am.
Okay. You know that the urine screen showed a presumptive don't know that presumptive positive for the metabolites in his urine was evidence of the fact that he had ingested cocaine?
Well, because it's a presumptive test, and that's why you do confirmatory testing in blood. If you can test for a lot of things in urine. If you eat a bagel with poppy seeds, you will test positive for morphine in the urine. But that doesn't mean you use morphine, which is why you do confirmatory testing in the blood.
Well, we don't have any bagels being served to him in the medical record, do we?
Well, you don't know, and that causes speculation, and don't answer the question.
All right, so, I want to be clear. You think that because of the fact that a presumptive test occurred, that therefore there is no scientific evidence of the fact that Mr. Dent had ingested cocaine. Is that what you're saying?
That's right, you have to confirm it.
Who has to confirm it?
The-
Do doctors rely on these tests to treat patients that are in life and death situations in the hospital every day?
They do.
Oh, and they do it based on a presumption that you are willing to discount now because of the fact that you're here to testify for the prosecution?
I'm going to object.
Sustained.
What is your basis for saying that there is no scientific proof? If there was an immunoassay, which is a scientific test, would you agree,
Right.
done by technicians in a hospital, which you would agree were trained in science, would you agree,
Right.
in order to determine whether or not somebody has something in their system that might hurt them so that they might be able to save his life? What is it that takes away from the fact that that is evidence of cocaine in his system?
There is a difference between finding cocaine in the urine and finding cocaine in the blood.
We heard this.
So I don't care if the urine test is positive.
Because he's saying it has no scientific validity and that he's discounting it completely.
Sustained. Move on.
Will the judge take judicial notice?
I'm going to object. Now he wants to tell the jury.
I don't. I asked you the
Counsel,
question
move on.
first
Move on.
before I was getting into the substance of what it is that I'm saying. BEG or BAG? What?
Benzoylecgonine.
B-
BEG.
BEG. When cocaine is ingested, Doc,
Right.
there's a chemical change that occurs. Is
Right.
that correct?
Right.
As it is with all food, most of it is chemically changed once it's ingested and being digested.
Right.
Is BEG a natural result of the metabolism of the ingestion of cocaine?
It is.
Is there another metabolite that also is produced by cocaine?
Well, there's several.
If there was, and are you familiar with the urine screen?
Well, not. There's several commercial packages.
Are you familiar with whether or not they are meant to react to one metabolite or the other?
I think most of them react to benzoylecgonine and ecgonine methyl ester.
Okay. And so if it is, in fact, a presumptive positive, it is still positive for something.
Well, that's true.
Okay. You're not saying that the technicians made a mistake when they were doing the analysis of the urine screen, are you?
No.
Okay. Because they have protocols, correct?
Right.
And just like the Michigan State Police have protocols.
Right.
All right. Now, you're not ruling out the possibility that the Michigan State Police could make a mistake. You weren't there.
Yes, that's true.
All right. and I'm not trying to cast any aspersions, but you have seen in your experience some difficulties with people who are doing analysis at certain labs not following their protocols, correct?
I haven't perfectly experienced, but I have heard of them.
You've heard about the Detroit crime lab and how it's
Jack,
closed
what does the
down?
Detroit crime lab have to do with anything?
It has to do with the potential for a mistake or a manipulation.
Well, you don't have to say specifically Detroit crime lab. You can
Okay,
say,
there-
have there been situations where there have been problems with labs in the processing or something?
And the answer is?
Sure.
Okay, nothing further. Thanks, Judge.
Anything.
And they get shut down when there's problems.
Okay, that's, okay, anything else?
No,
All right, step down. Thank you so much.
thank you, Doc.
Let's stand up and take a stretch break.
You're all set? No, you're all.
Ready?
All right, I want to approach, please.
All right, you ready? Call your next witness.
Lieutenant Tawana Powell, bring with you the traffic records, please.
Madam? Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm testimony about to give this man is true, full, truth, nothing but truth, so the God?
I do.
Please be seated yourself well. You're still under oath, madam. Are you ready, Mr. Thomas?
I am, Judge.
All right, very good. Do you need to use the,
No, I do not.
okay, very good. You may proceed at this time.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
All right, I've asked you to bring up with you certain records. Did you have them with you?
Which one? You said something about some kind of records. Which specific ones are you talking about, sir?
I'm talking about any time that you have evidence that Floyd Dent was arrested for a traffic offense.
Yes.
Okay. Ma'am, you
Yes.
were aware that Floyd Dent was driving that night without a plate on his vehicle, is that correct?
It was a paper plate, yes.
Okay. You were aware, were you not, that at the time that he was driving, that he did not have a valid license?
Yes.
Were you aware that there were warrants out for his arrest at that time for those offenses?
Not when I got the case.
Are you aware now?
Yes.
Okay. No, I'm not talking back then. I'm talking about now. He had 2 warrants out for his arrest.
At the time he was stopped.
Yes.
Let me double check.
I'd like to know the relevancy of this.
I'm gonna allow it.
It goes to a state of mind.
I'll allow it.
I am aware of one.
At least one?
One, yes.
All right. Ma'am, we had talked about this before coming on to the witness stand, and you had indicated to me that you had made a compilation of the number of times since 2009 that Floyd Dent had been arrested and taken in.
Yes,
All right.
it's on his history.
Okay. Can you please give me, in a chronological sense, the dates that had occurred?
I think we're going a little far afield.
I'll allow it.
Okay, just one second. Let me get to the report. I'm sorry, I had it, and then I had to go to the other page. Just give me 1 second.
All right.
That's that. Oh, right here. No, that's the wrong one. Finally got it. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. The dates are as follows, and sometimes in this criminal history it's not chronological, so just bear with me.
Okay.
Okay, in April the 1st, 2010, there was an arrest in Dearborn Heights for driving while license suspended. On April the 26th of 2010, in Canton Township, there was an arrest for driving while license suspended. In December 31st, 2011, in Canton Township, there was a arrest for driving while license suspended. On April 1st, 2013, there's arrest in Canton Township for driving a suspended license. There, on March 24th, 2009, there is an arrest for, it just says traffic. So I imagine that's something to do with traffic. It doesn't say specifically what it is.
But it says arrest, and that's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
I stop a car, that's not an arrest. I stop a car and take the person into custody, that is an arrest.
Yes, if you don't have to take them into the jail necessarily for it to be an official arrest. If they don't have a license, that's an arrestable offense. If you place cuffs on them and place them in the back of your patrol car and subsequently let them go, that's still an arrest.
Okay. And I think that for my purposes, that's what I want you to give us.
Okay.
What else? Do we have any others?
No, that's it. That's all I have.
Ma'am, did you tell me that he was arrested in Southfield by the Southfield Police Department?
No.
Did
Let's see.
you tell?
Just one second.
Just give her an opportunity.
Dearborn, Canton. It's one in here in 2001.
For
Michigan State Police, it says traffic,
where?
but it's no data. Oh, I'm sorry, it says driving on suspended license, that's 2001, November the 19th, 2001.
In what jurisdiction?
It just says, it doesn't say, it says MSP Post 25, which is Taylor.
Did you run a lien check on Mr. Dent?
Yes,
Is this a traffic lien that you're reading from, or is it another criminal history lien?
it's a
I'm
criminal,
gonna object. He's got the
No,
fact that he's been arrested a number of times. Now he's gonna start getting into the facts.
No,
circumstances.
Judge, I'm not. I just want to know dates, times, and arrests.
And I think he's got it up
Move
a
on,
little.
that's enough.
Well, Judge, I got more. You-
Ask more
All
questions,
right.
but that's enough, okay?
Ma'am, did you review the Southfield Police Department records relating to arrests?
I'm gonna object, Your